Okay, nobody likes grammar, except for me, maybe a little bit. But everybody needs grammar if they're going to be a good writer. So today we're just going to talk about 5 simple rules that will help your writing stay clear and help you keep focused as you edit, with a couple of bonus rules tossed in at the end. Don't worry, this will be fun. Hopefully, maybe a little bit. Hi, I'm Megan. I'm a published author and writing coach, and I love helping other writers think through each part of the writing process so they can finish their projects and meet their goals. Grammar is one of those topics that nobody really liked in school. Even me, I'll admit it was not my favorite. But now that I've been a professional writer for about 5 years, I realize the importance of grammar, and it's actually kind of interesting to think about all the rules. If you're going to write something that people read and can't put down, you don't want the grammar mistakes or the clunky editing to make it all distracting. Plus, if you're submitting a novel to an agent or a short story to a competition or a small press, you want it to be able to be as clear and polished as possible. So today we're going to talk about 5 simple grammar mistakes that you can look for as you're editing your short story or novel. All right, this first grammar rule is something that I always got marked off for in university because I just constantly made this error, and I've seen it a lot in other writers' work as well. It's called a comma splice. So this is when you only use a comma to separate 2 distinct independent ideas. What you have to do is connect them with a comma and a conjunction. So this is really common to do in writing because we use it a lot in informal writing. We write this way when we're texting, when we're writing an email, and then it bleeds into our more formal writing, like when we're writing a story or a novel. So the problem with comma splices is it can make your ideas run together, which messes up the flow and can kind of throw your reader off. So a couple examples of this, you might say something like, "It was thundering all morning. We thought for sure it was going to rain." So it was thundering all morning, comma, we thought for sure it was going to rain. You want to say, "It was thundering all morning, comma, so we thought it was going to rain." Or, "It was thundering all morning, comma, and we thought for sure it was going to rain." So putting that conjunction in separates those 2 distinct ideas and just helps it make more sense in the reader's brain. At least more sense in my brain. Anyone else's? So that's our first grammar rule. Look out for comma splices in your own writing, and if you want a more in-depth look at when to use commas and when not to use them, I've made a video on that as well. The second grammar rule we're going to talk about today is subject-verb agreement. So this one is pretty standard, pretty easy. Just make sure your verb matches your subject. So if your subject is plural, your verb needs to be plural. If your subject is singular, your verb needs to be singular. All right, so an example of this might be, "The plants is sitting in the window." It sounds awkward. It probably would jump out at you. But the plants is plural, is not plural. So you have to say the plants are sitting in the window. Pretty straightforward. Sometimes this can be tricky though when you have multiple subjects or a subject that seems plural but is really singular. So for example, the jury are deliberating. The jury, you think in your mind, okay, a jury has a bunch of different people in it. That means it's plural. It's a group of people. But you're referring to the jury as a single jury. So it's still a singular subject. So you're going to say the jury is deliberating. So just make sure as you're going through that your verbs always match your main subject. The third grammar rule we're going to talk about is a little bit similar. It's pronoun agreement. So basically this can get tricky when you introduce multiple characters in a sentence and then you talk about what one character is doing. You really have to make sure you're focusing in on what the subject of the sentence is or who the subject of the sentence is. And you're just going to make sure that if you're talking about a he, it stays he throughout the sentence. So Jerry was running and then he got tired and stopped. Perfect. Jerry, he refers to Jerry. It's all in agreement. The incorrect version of this would be to say, Jerry, Jim, and Carl were running, and then he got tired and stopped. Your reader's going to wonder, wait, who got tired and stopped? Was it Jerry? Was it Jim? Was it Carl? I don't know. So you always want to make sure your pronouns match the main subject of your sentence. Another way to think about this is making sure that your reader will know who he or she or they or it is referring to. So if you don't name your subject in the sentence because maybe you named them earlier on, make sure that that pronoun you use in a subsequent sentence is clearly related to the right subject. That way your reader doesn't think you're starting to talk about someone else or wonder which of the many characters you listed earlier you're referring to. All right, so the fourth rule we're going to talk about today is verb agreement. Really, everything in grammar, is it all just about agreeing? We want our stories to have little conflict. Verb agreement means, again, if you start using one kind of verb in your sentence, like one verb tense, you want to keep using that verb tense throughout your sentence. If you start using the past tense, either in your paragraph or in your sentence, and then you switch to present tense, it's going to be a little bit confusing and throw everything off. So make sure what you start with is what you finish with. Now, this doesn't mean as you're writing a story, you can't start talking about something in the present tense and then move to something that happened in the past tense. This is really more at the level of paragraphs and sentences. So clearly it would sound pretty awkward if I said something like, I walked to the store and then I buy eggs, milk, and cheese. Instead, you just want to say, I walked to the store and I bought eggs, milk, and cheese. That one already sounds pretty awkward, but it can get a little confusing when you jump into like the past perfect tense or the past perfect progressive tense and all those tenses that we learned in like 7th grade and don't remember what they mean. Once you start mixing those around, it can be a little bit trickier to think, okay, does this sound awkward or not? For example, I had just walked to the store and I had been looking for eggs, milk, and cheese. So technically those verb tenses don't align. It doesn't sound as awkward as the first example, but it's still technically incorrect. What you would want to say is, I had walked to the store and I had looked for eggs. So you've got a little bit of a parallel structure happening with how you're using your verbs, and they're in the same tense. Is it the biggest deal in the world if you mix up these very similar, very closely related tenses? Probably not. But if you want to be technical about it, your verb tenses should always align. So that was the 4th grammar rule. The 5th grammar rule we're going to talk about is modifier connections. So basically, when you start a sentence with a modifying phrase, you want the subject that you're modifying to follow right after it. So for instance, if I said something like, because he was losing hair and not eating, my vet told me my cat was sick. So what I'm actually doing there is saying that my vet was losing hair and not eating. But what I meant to say is my cat was losing hair and not eating. So you need to make sure that cat follows right behind the modifier. So it could be something like, because he was losing hair and not eating, my cat went to the vet. Or my cat was sick. So always remember, when you're starting a sentence with a modifying phrase, follow that right up with what you're modifying. Alright, so now we're going to talk about a few really quick bonus rules for you as you go through and edit your story or novel. First bonus rule is entities. When you're talking about entities, you always want to refer to them as its, not their. So for example, the Department of Grammar Enforcement just released its new rules for grammar. You wouldn't say just released their new rules because you're talking about a thing, an entity, not a person or group of people. Even though it does represent a group of people, but it's its own thing. Second bonus rule, adverbs versus adjectives. Just remember that adjectives are always going to be describing a noun, whereas adverbs are going to be describing other adjectives or, more commonly, verbs. So the nurse administered the shot quick would be incorrect. She administered the shot quickly. Quickly is modifying the verb administered. But you could say the shot was quick and painless. The shot being the noun, quick being an adjective. The next bonus rule is always to think about your comparatives and your superlatives. So these are words like easy and easier, funny and funnier. You're never going to want to say it was more easy the second time around. You're going to want to say it was easier. Or that was way funnier than it was last week, right? You don't want to say it was way more funny than it was last week. Same goes for superlatives, which show the best of something. So this was the most easy test I've ever taken. That would be incorrect. Just say this was the easiest test I've ever taken. And that was it, just a few little bonus rules for you. So hopefully this grammar overview serves as a helpful guide for you as you're continuing to edit your short story or novel. Always remember that as fiction writers, we do get to break and bend the rules every now and then, but just make sure you're always focusing on whether or not your writing is clear and understandable for your reader. So I hope you found this helpful. If you want more tips on how to think through each part of the writing process, hit the subscribe button and I'll see you next time. Bye. What are you doing? Upside down cat. That's casual.